YouTube. As per usual, if you miss the lives or miss pieces of the live on Instagram or on TikTok, you can feel free to go over on YouTube, subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Nathan Springer, and you can enjoy the lives there. All of them that have been recorded thus far, you can go back there and find them for your enjoyment. Okay, so welcome to Mindful Live number 26. Yes, we are on Mindful Live number 26 on Thursday the 27th of January. Welcome. And what we're going to talk about today, to jump right into it, what we have to lean into is the private sector instructing the government on what they should do with some of their assets that they currently own. Sell bank's rum company to private investors. Anthony Sabga III on state assets. Now, there are two stories I'm going to read on this same topic. And you'd notice a little difference in how these stories are introduced when you see them coming from two different media outlets. The framing is different. Now, listen to this framing carefully. Sell bank's rum company to private investors. Anthony Sabga III on state assets. Well, I could tell you just from the phrasing of that headline, and the fact is, unfortunately, especially in modern times, most people just read the headlines anyway. Many people aren't going to delve further into the article to see exactly what he said and how he phrased it. Most people are going to run away with the fact that Anthony Sabga, the CEO, or they might phrase it as the owner of Ansa Makal, wants to buy out all the state resources, because he is telling the state to sell your resources and sell it to private investors. And when you're talking about private investors in Trinidad and Tobago, obviously Ansa Makal's name would be pretty high up on that list. So the government should not be in the business of banks, rum companies, or port management, and should try to sell its assets to the private investors. That is the view of Anthony Sabga III, Group Chief Executive Officer of Ansa Makal Group of Companies. Now, let me go over to the Guardian article. And the Guardian article introduces this same story a little differently. Here's how they phrase it. Sabga, government should facilitate, not be in business. That's a different phrasing and a different framing. One is telling you that basically Anthony Sabga, the owner of Ansa Makal, them 1%ers, are trying to go out there and get the state assets, while the other is saying that what this businessman is saying is that the state should be in the business of facilitating entrepreneurship and private endeavors, and not be in the business of making and owning businesses. One is phrased a lot differently. Now, personally, I find the way the Express, which was the first article, the way they phrased it and framed it, I don't find it very accurate, because yes, Rooney, he does. Because the Express article phrasing was a little bit antagonistic to the way he actually said it. But the Guardian had such a favorable phrasing of it, don't you think? One might wonder who might be the owner of that Guardian newspaper. Who do you think? The Guardian had such a positive phrasing and framing of the entire thing. Government's role is to facilitate business, not to be in business. Anthony N. Sabga III, the group chief, right. Sabga said the exception to this rule is the case of an extraordinary need to protect national interests or to avoid economic collapse of countries. Sabga made this statement yesterday as he delivered the address to the American Chamber of Commerce of TNT as it held its Economic Outlook Forum 2022. He went on to say, I will mention the positive role our government played in developing the local natural gas sector, which is now at a global scale. Yet it is well known that government ownership of private companies has been notorious for lowering productivity, wasting resources, and distorting competition. Now, every single thing he said there is a fact. That is reality. Government ownership of private companies has been known and has been notorious to lower productivity. That is a well-known thing. When the government owns a company, very often the productivity of that said company drops pretty low, so long as they don't give it to one company, leave it on the open market, right? The productivity usually drops pretty low, wasting resources because the government isn't interested necessarily in maximizing their profits and maximizing the use of their resources, because it's not their personal resources, it's other people's money. So very often you tend to see in government-owned businesses, wasting of resources becomes a widely seen thing. While if that was a private company, I could tell you a lot of the printing paper, etc., that in many government offices could just walk away whenever it wants. If that was a private company, I could tell you for sure they would have a lot more accountability of the resources that are wasted. So he is actually correct there, and it distorts competition. And here's the problem with distorting competition. The thing with distorting competition, as you might know, when it comes to free markets function. Free markets, they get their benefit out of competition. You see, the general idea of free market is it's free for you to choose what you get in that market. You are free to have the choice to choose whatever you want. You are free to sell to whoever you want. And that freedom depends on competition. And the thing with government, when you have someone in the market, someone is an actor in the market, yet also they are the authority that oversees the entire market, competition would almost always take a second place to them, because they have outsized power over that free market. So just get better at business and our taxes will not raise. Are you asking the government to get better at business? I'm sorry, but I never really understand this. If we have governments for 200 years functioning one way, and we see that it seems it is impossible for governments to treat businesses because of the incentive structure of what a government is, it is impossible for governments to treat businesses as efficient as a private company will. But yet still, the hope is not that government should get out of business. No. The hope is we open a ministry of business, as someone says here, and all of a sudden, the government is going to magically treat people better. This is to go off very tangentially on an issue dealing with like gender, etc. This is like, we know what happens to people when they stray off into the dark. There are criminal elements who would have their way with you if they can. Now, if we know the reality of humanity, the reality of human existence since humans have existed, is that if people trail off into dark areas where someone else could do whatever they want with them and have no accountability for it, it generally tends to happen. Would we then advise more people, do not stray off into the dark? Or would we hope that, you know what is going to happen now? We are all going to still stray off into the dark, but let's make a new rule that all the bad guys must be good guys now. Yeah. Or we'll make a rule, we'll make a law that bad guys cannot be bad guys, and bad guys cannot take advantage of people in the dark anymore. And when we make that law, then all of a sudden we'd still stray off into the darkness and no one would take advantage of us anymore. That does not make sense. We work with what works in reality. We work with reality. And if something does not line up with reality, our hope cannot be that what we're going to do now is fix reality and fix the reactions of reality to suit for what we hope works in our mind. You see, what we would like to happen, we would like, if it were, that our government could control a business as effectively as the private sector, and all the profits of that business be distributed evenly among the citizens of the country. That would be perfect. But that's utopian thinking. And you see, here's the problem with utopian thinking. With utopian thinking, you could always say, well, it hasn't happened yet. You know what? We need to give more control to the government for them to really make this happen. Like if it's going to. At some point in time, I think we should lean into reality that maybe governments cannot handle private businesses. they can't sell off FCB, people will suffer. It's true, yeah, but what's his other motivation? I agree, prevent monopolies. So just get better at business, right. If one type of citizen can access the jobs or facilities, that wasn't real socialism. Yeah, that is the ever famous cry. That wasn't real socialism. But waiting on real socialism, we'd have millions of people starving. So here's what. We take our understanding of the fake socialism as what generally happens when you try to give government too much power. And we'd say, you know what? What generally brings people out of poverty is giving them free choice, allowing them to be able to exist in a free market and take part in that free market. Now, here's part of the problem, as some people are pointing out, that it would be a problem if the case is that the government just sells all of those state assets over to one private enterprise. You see, what we have to understand also is how it came about the government existed in some of these private enterprises in the first place. Some of them just took the place of the multinational companies that were taking advantage of us, and they just took that place there. Some of them, in some cases, the state had to create a company because there were no private companies fulfilling that need in the market, so the state created a company. Now, the case is that in many of the state companies and many avenues that the state has businesses, they have a monopoly, or they have something resembling a monopoly. And it's going to be a problem if we just have it that the state says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to sell the port. And we're going to sell our ports to Ansamakal. So what ends up happening is we in Trinidad and Tobago now move away from the state owning the port to Ansamakal alone owning the port. And what the Ansamakal chief here is speaking about, he isn't speaking about leaving the avenue open for private companies to build their own businesses. You see, in a free market, if you leave it up to companies to just open and build their own businesses, then I think competition would be a much more realistic thing. Because if you have to build a company, you'd have to build up your reputation, and that won't happen overnight. You can't just, generally speaking, you can't just open a company today and become a monopoly tomorrow. That's something that has to be built. But the case is, many of those state assets and companies are already monopolies. So if you just allow, okay, what we're going to do as the state is sell off these state assets and these state businesses, you may end up giving that monopoly over to one private company, which isn't going to really put us in a better place. They can't compete with the government doesn't care about profits. That is correct. You think Biden and the Democrats will be successful in November in their midterm elections? I think the Democrats are getting ready for licking in their midterm elections. That's just my personal view, looking at that bit of politics. Okay, going back to the Express article now. According to the executive, industries such as banking, rum, manufacture, and port management, etc., are not the natural domain of government. The ongoing ownership of these businesses is a considerable distraction from the government's material work to ensure the safety, security, and health. Where they have controlling interest, I think a formal timetable of divestment should be developed. After that, publish regular updates on their progress at least twice a year. I agree with him to some extent. Here's the thing. The government has a responsibility. The government's main responsibility is safety, security, and in our case, health. If the government is not meeting their responsibilities in safety and security and health, then how does it make sense that we give the government further responsibilities that would only expand what they are already not meeting? I find that strange. That does not make sense. I say, you know what, government, you seem like you have your hands filled with security. Let's give you the security of our country. You help us with security, and that would certainly help the business community and help everyone make money. And when you have control over that, then we can expand what you do. How do we have people who are incompetent in one area and we expect them all of a sudden to be competent in the other area? Why do you think the government holding the bank is a form of security in this society? Remember, there are private banks in this society. For example, I know quite a few people who do not bank with First Citizen. All the banking they do are with the private banks. I know quite a few people like that. So why do you think the state holding that bank benefits society so much? Because the other three are bloodsuckers. But personally, I think all banks are nearly bloodsuckers. And I find, here's my problem. Here's my problem I have generally with banks on a whole. The lack of choice. The system keeps doing things and creating laws and creating policies that push you and force you into using banks. And because you are forced into using banks, banks no longer have to treat you like a customer that they have to woo. A bank no longer has to go out there and get you to want to come and be a customer. You have no choice. So the bank can bully you and do you as they please, especially if they can all agree on how they are going to bully you, because you have no choice. So there was once a time when putting your money in the bank generally meant that you may have some growth in that bank. Now that doesn't exist anymore. You pay a bank to hold your money. That bank then takes your money. Bear in mind, when you put your money in the bank, I actually am not sure about that answer, Schizo. When you put your money in the bank, your money doesn't stay there. They use your money for investments all about the place. When they get profits off of that investment, they keep the profits. And then they are taking a fee from you for you to keep your money there. I find that makes no sense. That makes no sense. It shouldn't, well, it makes sense in terms of a business model, obviously. But people would not have optionally done that unless they were forced to do it. You see, the fact is, not any and everyone can say, you know what, I'm going to open a bank. Because on that business model, that's a sure proof way of making money. The business model the banks have in conjunction with what the governments do to force everyone into the banks is a sure way of making money. It's like they cannot not make money. You have to use the bank. Then when you use the bank, they have your money and they can use your money to invest all around the world. I saw someone mention the name of the Rothschilds, and there are lots of conspiracies around that. But the general way a lot of the bankers gained so much power all around the world was with other people's money. So you'd have a pension fund invest in an investment bank, and the investment banker now has these billions to wheel and weave around the world as if it were his own, but actually it was just the accumulated funds of a set of old tanties and uncles who invested in a pension fund, and now they're using this as their investment money. And they abuse it. My problem with that is if it was all just free market dealings and you had the choice of going in there and freely choosing, okay, I'll give you my money and I'll see what would happen. Fine. But when you have the government on the side of these bankers, herding people into these banks, forcing these banks to make preposterous amounts of profit, that's my problem with it. So, I have no problem with all the banks being private. I might enjoy that. But then take away the whole set of government protections on it. And don't tell me that you need to have all these laws to catch money laundering while we still have so many money launderers in our society. It's the same thing like I was saying about expecting the government to all of a sudden become good at managing something when they haven't been good at managing it ever. It's like all of a sudden we expect that these new policies that a government is going to put in place are really there to catch the money launderers and the criminals. But actually what it does is it just sticks up the system for the smaller guy, and the money launderers obviously are still laundering their money and they're still making their big money. It's insane. And a lot of that's why whenever you ask a government to do something, all of you in the live, anytime you're asking a government to do something, think twice, thrice, multiple times about it. Because very often there are unintended consequences, or sometimes intended consequences, that very often hurt the smaller man first. Anytime, think of it. If you have, think of society as us all holding on to a rope. We're trying to climb this rope and we're all holding on to the rope. And we're hanging on to this rope at varying levels. The richest person might be at the very top of this rope, while the poorer is right at the bottom, holding on for their dear life. Now, this rope is hanging over something. It's hanging over acid. Let's see. Once you slip off this rope, you die. That's the reality. We are all hanging on to this rope, but the wealthier you are, or the higher up you are in society, the higher up you are on that rope. Grand. If you do anything in society that makes the entirety of life more difficult, who is it going to affect first? You see, in the analogy, making life more difficult in society is like something, whatever the rope is tied on to here, just lowered a little bit. So the wealthiest people in society, the people holding on at the top of that rope, aren't going to feel anything. But those poorest members of society, they can't afford to slip. As soon as that rope dips a bit, they're in the acid. And every time you make life a little more difficult in society, there are some people at the bottom there of society who are going to die because of it. So one of the prime examples of this is the climate change argument that you see all around the world. When you hear people talk about let's change energy, let's stop the use of fossil fuel, let's stop the use of all fossil fuels by next year, and that's the only way our world will survive. Well, here's the thing. If you stop the use of all fossil fuels by next year, the richest in the world will be fine. What you're going to do is cause the death of possibly billions of the poorest people in the world. Because by stopping fossil fuel, what you essentially do there, like you could talk about the environmental factors and the environment may be better for it. Okay, fine, maybe. But what you essentially do is you basically make the price of energy more expensive. You make energy more expensive. The bottom line of it is that when it comes to me running my devices, my refrigerator running, all my electric stove, possibly everything, what it basically does is it increases the price of energy. If energy gets more expensive, the people that are hurt first would be the poorest. All the time. Nearly anytime you make an increased difficulty in society, it hurts the poorest. So for example, in Trinidad, when they change some of those car laws, like our Minister of Finance, who he's not a very palatable person, he's not a very likable guy. And every time he speaks so glowingly about the environmental policies he's doing to help push the country in the direction of better cars and more reasonable cars on our streets. What that actually does is the poorest guy who was now scraping up enough to afford the bottom level car, that van that is just barely holding up there, he was now going to attain that. You know that insurance commercial where the old guy has the $1 on the fishing rod and oh, you almost got it. Try again. Oh, you almost got it. That is what that is actually doing. The guy who may have just been closing in on affording that vehicle, you just made that out of his reach. And here's how that cascades. Here's the chain reaction of that. That one vehicle may have allowed him to enter another bracket of earning. Because what transport would allow you to get better jobs. Now you can move further, you can get a transport job. So by doing that, you just made life a little more difficult for those at the bottom. How is energy going to be more expensive without fossil fuel? That's okay. Let's break down exactly how that is going to happen. The current energy system is built around fossil fuels. There are millions of, well, not millions, but many avenues already created for the fossil fuels to move seamlessly from inside the soil to being burnt and causing the steam to turn a turbine and give us electricity. If in Trinidad, for example, we were to stop our production of electricity by burning fossil fuels and change over to, say, solar panels, first, we're going to have to buy a lot of solar panels. That's going to increase the cost of energy right there. Running all of those things is going to, at least in the initial part, be more expensive. So, for sure, who knows, maybe in the long run, some people may say after the first 100 years, it may pay back for itself and then be cheaper. That may be possible, but in those first 100 years, you would have billions of poor people dying. That's how it gets more expensive. Well, where do you think most of our energy comes from? Ionic hybrid, the problem is gas was selling less. Solar and wind are low density and unreliable. Yes, that is also very, very true. Sabda also spoke on the government's COVID-19 decisions, and I agreed with him here too. Sabga indicated the government must keep up with the rapid changes in COVID protocols. This is the same thing I was seeing on the before, was it, when we read about the Guyanese woman who couldn't reach to see her to bury her father over in Guyana because we have some outdated COVID protocols that don't recognize if you previously got infected, one shot has you as fully vaccinated, but we didn't recognize that, so we had this lady stranded in Trinidad, possibly causing her to contract the virus here too. Longer quarantine periods decrease productivity on a national level and threaten business continuity. We need a risk-based approach to managing our public health response to COVID, one that balances the need for protection of the citizens with the need to keep people employed and working effectively. I agree. And I think our government, as I've said before, is lagging behind in updating their decision making. Good night, Dora. Everyone just want to agree because of who said it, let's be honest. I didn't agree because of who said it. I agree because I agree. The irony is industrial scale upgrade to solar and wind produces more carbon. That is true. That is actually very, very true. Why, thank you, Hurricane. That is much appreciated. Yes, solar and wind, to just close off on that tangent, solar and wind, the production of it does require more carbon. Requires a lot of carbon. It requires mining that requires carbon. Everything to make a solar panel would require carbon. Everything to make a wind turbine would require carbon. When the wind turbine goes down and you have to produce it again, it requires carbon. So it's climate change, you could talk for years, possibly, about some of the difficulties in trying to understand climate change and the nuances and intricacies of climate change and how it is all changing. Now, the things Mr. Sabga was saying there is actually very pertinent to the current news we are seeing in Trinidad, where, for example, we are seeing recently TSTT is falling into some difficulties because of the change in technology that we have been noticing. The change in technology has been licking up some of TSTT's business, and now they're looking to restructure. TSTT dropped calls. TSTT and Digicel lament impact of digital communication platforms. In 1979, British new wave group The Buggles sang the song Video Killed the Radio Star to highlight the increased popularity of television as a form of information and entertainment to the detriment of the radio industry. Well, in that vein, now it seems that digital applications and communications platforms are affecting traditional telecommunication channels. It may be expected that in the height of a pandemic that has restricted in-person interaction, telecommunication companies would be among the major benefactors as they provide the means to stay in touch with family and friends. But unfortunately, the telecommunication companies have been realizing their money has been going down. They haven't recognized that increase. The Prime Minister was speaking about the difficulties that the telecommunication service is facing in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister said TSTT has been significantly impacted by the economic conditions brought on by the pandemic. This, coupled with the increased consumer adoption of digital applications like WhatsApp and the utilization of communication platforms like Zoom, has seen a steady erosion of traditional voice revenue. Rowley said, according to a TSTT report, there had been a 50% decline in fixed voice calling over 10 years and a 20% decline in mobile voice calling over the same period. The thing, I don't, as someone said there, these companies had years to adapt. I don't have pity, as it were, for the companies, because for example, over in the United States, there was the Blockbuster company that was on top of the world running movies in the 90s, and then in no time Netflix came about and they were past tense. Companies have to keep up with the time if they have to stay viable. Otherwise, those companies would cease to exist, and the reality is new companies would be created to replace them. But as time changes, not only does the technology in a specific area upgrade, yes, they did, I knew that. Not only does technology in a specific area upgrade, as in we're seeing it in that same line, but in some lines, the technology itself reaches to a dead end as we reach such a technological advancement level that that technology is now obsolete. So the owner of Space Force and Tesla, Mr. Elon Musk, who is currently ranked as the richest man in the world, he has an internet company up and coming called Starlink, and the intention of Starlink is to be able to supply internet to anyone, anywhere, regardless of how remotely placed you are, because they're going to be doing it through a series or a network of satellites all around the world. That's what Space Force does. They send up satellites, they send up rockets. Now, if that comes into being, where it may be possible for us to sign up for a digital service for internet internationally, that is going to be insanely fast. That is going to be very likely very cheap. Because if you could provide the internet for 8 billion people, you could charge them 1 cent per day and you'd still make a handsome bit of money. So the possibility is that the entire telecommunications market may disappear. And all the restructuring that TSTT might do might be for nothing in the long run. What makes that more unfortunate, though, is the fact that TSTT is a state-run company. You see, if TSTT was a private company, private companies close all the time. Private companies close all the time. If your business model is no longer suitable for the present market, well, the company falls and that's that. And most people aren't that worried the company closed. What are you gonna do? That is life. But a state company is so much different. One of the examples I like looking back when we're talking about, do we have 5G in Trinidad? No, we don't. 5G, there was an interesting story recently about 5G affecting some of the, is it the Boeing 777 planes? One specific category of planes were being really affected by the 5G signals that were being rolled out in certain parts in the United States. An interesting story. But they need to evolve the model to internet-based communication. They're saying that is what they're doing, just by the way. They're saying that's what they're doing. They're saying they are attempting to restructure the structure of their company and go more into that digital business. Digicel has said they already did that. TSTT is just lagging behind. And the problem here is that it's a state company. As I was saying, one of my favorite examples to look at the weirdness of state companies going out of business was the Carney 1975 Limited. Here it was, a company was running bust. If you speak to some people from inside Carney in the old days and hear the bacchanal of that company had corruption from the bottom go straight up. Because everyone felt like this was just the country thing. This isn't any one person's thing. This is just the country thing. So I would try to just benefit as much as I can. You hear from cane cutters that some of the cane cutters used to be stealing whatever they can from in the fields. They would be stealing fertilizer, expensive fertilizer, A1 fertilizer out there. They're walking away with full feed bags of it. That was known. While it was known that some of the drivers would hide on the job and lie about certain things. It was known that a lot of people inside of the factories were working and cutting corners. And then the higher ups were doing insanity. These people were supposed to be paying NIS. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but I believe NIS is 2/3 from the, is it 2/3 or 3/4? The numbers evade me sometime. But your employer actually pays more and you pay a smaller fraction. The employer, Carney 1975 Limited, was taking the employees, the cane cutters, etc. out in the field, taking out their deduction from NIS, like, you know, those little crooked private companies. You think, no, those big state companies not going to do nonsense like that. They were taking their NIS and nobody knows where the NIS was going. Here's the thing. The NIS left the pockets of the employees. The NIS left the coffers of Carney 1975 Limited. So all that NIS money was going into someone's pocket. Someone in Trinidad currently may still be floating off of Carney 1975 Limited NIS stolen money. There was a lot of bacchanal in that company. From the bottom, go right up. So when you're hearing people talking about who is to blame for Carney, the blame for Carney could share and spread pretty widely. But then the company closed. And when this company closed, I don't know how many of you may have worked at a company when it closed. When the company closes, if you're large enough, you might get some kind of separation, something. But especially if the company closed because it's no longer profitable, chances are you might not get much. This company closed. Workers who, now I have no problem working in the field, and more power to manual labor. But workers who are working at the bottom rung of the salary levels got a house lot, got money, and got 2 acres of farmland. What is that? How is that possible? How does that make sense? That's why states are not supposed to run companies. You can be 1,000 times more effective with a simple broadcasting public speaking course at Love Radio. Okay, I'd like to see an example of how effective the speakers from Love Radio are, and then maybe we could talk about that. We could have a speaker from Love Radio join in the live, and maybe you could get some advertisement here for your courses over there. So we'd speak at some point in time. But yes, some governments run good companies. Which governments run really good companies? Which governments do you know? Oh, you worked at ArcelorMittal. Well, that was a bit of trouble. That was a bit of trouble. That ArcelorMittal one. And the funny thing about that, the Singapore curve on, Singapore ran a system in the earlys that was extremely free market. Singapore got their wealth by running an extremely free market system. What is strange now, and I hope it doesn't work to their detriment, but what is strange now is Singapore now is attempting to change some of those policies, and some of the progressive governments that are coming in now in Singapore are attempting to get more of a handle on their economics and on their markets. I think in the long run that is going to cause disaster for them. Singapore got wealthy because they opened up their market as free and tax-free, and you all come in here and just run your businesses and just make sure you obey our general laws, and we are not going to get into too much of your business. And what happened there is their economies exploded because of it. So Singapore still isn't a good example of countries running good companies. I'm not sure about Singapore even in that example. I think just by the very nature of what a government is, what a state is, the incentive structure of a state is not given to running good businesses. You see, once you have to go up for political office, what your decisions, the decisions that you make, would be tainted by what you think is going to come out of your next political run. What you think the public is going to think about you. And as a businessman, some decisions that may be most sensible for your business cannot take public opinion into account. And public opinion, possibly if all of the governments running of businesses took into account public opinion, it may have been ineffective and inefficient, but it may not have been corrupt. But here's the other problem with the government's incentive structure in running companies. Not only when you're seeking election as a politician, you have to get the public to vote for you. Generally speaking, how you get the public to vote for you is you have to advertise to them. They have to get to know you. They have to get to know your name, your face, what you stand for. And all of that needs a lot of money. And where do you get your money? Campaign financing. So the next part of the government's incentive structure is they are beholden to campaign financiers. And how are they going to run a company when they have financial backing from another private company that may have vested interest in how this state company does business? That's really difficult. I think it's insane for us to even assume that the government is going to do something all above board when this is the kind of incentive structure we have around the governments. I don't think it would work. And this decline in TSTT is problematic, not only for TSTT, but I think for our entire country. And what we're seeing when we're looking, one of the part of what it seems to be the competition coming up for Trinidad, probably not very, very soon, but possibly in the near future, might very well be Guyana. One of the ways to look at this, I look at Guyanese news I try to look at Caribbean news every now and again. One of the ways to look at this, if you look at Guyana recently read a budget. There was so many goodies in that budget. You see how we are attempting to take out some goodies out of our budget, take out some of those subsidies and some of the extra help we give our citizens? Well, Guyana is really packing in some of those because they recognize we now hit wealth. And the benefit Guyana might have, I really do hope that they work successfully with their newfound resources. The benefit Guyana might have is they came out of difficulty. So anything added on is just added on to them. Guyana has an estimated projected growth for 2022 of 47.5%. That's their economic projected growth. You know what is Trinidad's economic projected growth? 47.5% is Guyana's. Do you know what Trinidad's is? 5.7%. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. This is over in Guyana. With large injections of revenue from the oil and gas sector, Guyana is expected to grow its economy by 47.5% with inflation, while inflation is pegged at 4.1% for 2022, according to Senior Minister in their Ministry of Finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. 552 billion. Wow. That is quite a lot of money being injected into the system. But have you examined the types of growth? Over in Guyana, well, Guyana is trying to ensure, we read previously about some of the laws, well, at least one of the law that they passed to help to make sure that the growth can be spread among their citizens. They're trying to make sure that some of the business that is coming in now into Guyana actually gets into their citizenry. The part of the problem Guyana would be facing is that the oil and gas sector all around the world is already pretty mature. And what is very likely going to happen is you're not going to have some new company. Well, it has already happened. You're not going to have some new company now going into Guyana learning about how to do this oil and gas business. They're going to come in with their already finished procedures, their already finished methodology, and they're just going to plug in that and use it there. The problem would be, would there be enough people in Guyana already trained to fit into this system that has already been established for a long time now? The benefit Trinidad has is we do have quite a lot of people already trained for this oil and gas system. Guyana's training for the oil and gas sector may be, well, at least 10 years out. You see, you'd have to train and then these people would have to get experience. While in Trinidad, you may have people trained with 50 years experience already in the industry and they're just chomping at the bit waiting to enter the Guyanese market. And that's part of the difficulty Guyana would be seeing. I want to move Guyana, any man wants to marry me. Ronnie, the kind of talk you hit in some of them lives, you might frighten some of them fellas, just to be honest. They could listen, they're already doing some of that. But what they're trying to do over in Guyana, they're trying to make sure that what ends up happening isn't that they get natural resources and all the money from the natural resources just sail out of the country. And that would be very unfortunate for them. And it's easy to happen because the country was already not impoverished, but they were not the wealthiest country. So when this newfound thing comes, it would be very easy to be advantaged out of your wealth if they are not very, very careful. Also, it may be easy to overspend as a government. It may be easy now as the government because there is so much money just awash in the system. It may be very easy for some of their government officials to perpetrate some dread kind of corruption in their society too. So they're at a particularly careful point in their development. I really do wish them the best though, because as the saying goes, I said it before, the rising tide raises all ships. So I think if Guyana gets better off, it would actually benefit Trinidad more. We would have better trade relationships with Guyana right there. In a free market, the wealthier the person you're trading with, the better it is to trade, generally speaking. When they was going all over the place and sending home, they want to fend against it now. That's how it goes, Ronnie. That's how it goes. And when they were going all about the place and sending home, those remittances, that's the name, those remittances, although they leave TNT and go across, if you're talking about Guyanese in Trinidad sending remittances home to Guyana, although they leave Trinidad, they still provided production in Trinidad. So the payment we paid them was for work. They provided work to Trinidad. So although they sent remittances back, that still had some benefit to Trinidad and Tobago. And very often what was the case is they very often took jobs that many Trinidadians didn't want in the first place. Yes, TNT service companies and manufacturers would benefit greatly once our government opens it up. If Guyana rises and our government sees the benefit and doesn't stymie the advancement of business models that would have that linkage, then we would see a lot of benefit. But the People's National Movement government, I find personally, tends to try to have a much closer clamp down on the business environment, on our economy. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of, you see, let me tell you what I wouldn't be surprised for. If Guyana starts to blossom, you have some entrepreneurs, not people who will. Yes, Guyana will want some partnerships with us. They have already said it. There are already Trinidad companies in Guyana. There are many Trinidadian companies already in Guyana. Good night, you unknown boy. Glad to have you here as per usual. So, yes, they would want that partnership, I believe. I can't even remember the last thing I was saying about that after I said with them wanting the partnership. So yes, they would actually want the partnerships. It benefits them too. Yes, Ansel already being in the house. Massey is over there. A lot of private companies over there. Right. I remember what I was going to say. Very likely, I wouldn't be surprised if you see this happening, especially under this present government. If you see smaller businesses, if you see entrepreneurs, like let's say there's a niche market over in Guyana for some kind of entrepreneurship, and you see a lot of small businesses starting to pop up, and they're making a lot of money fitting into some niche markets over in Guyana from Trinidad. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden the People's National Movement introduces a bill, because, you know, we have to regulate this. We cannot just have this free-for-all system. We have to get into partnership with the Guyanese government. So we must regulate what these businesses do, and they regulate it, and all of a sudden these small companies and the entrepreneurs can no longer do it, and Massey and Ansa McCall take everything. I would not be surprised if that happens. They are very business friendly. They are just not new business friendly. If your parents had a business that made a couple $1 million since the 60s, then you may be very friendly with that party. This is my personal view. Let me vote out. And here's the problem. Vote them out and replace them with whom? Who do you think would be better? Do not be mistaken by me saying that I find that they have that bad reputation with businesses, particularly small businesses. That doesn't necessarily mean that I automatically think that the other option would necessarily be better, because I do not actually think that. If the big ones are there, is their registered office over there for taxation purposes? Yes, they have registered offices over there. The Nathan Party. I highly doubt that one would work by King Kaka. I highly doubt. I think we would get a real fight for that Nathan Party business. All right. Two last stories right before we close. Two last stories. And they have to do, unfortunately, with COVID as per usual. First up is Omicron is now our dominant strain. CMO, Omicron now TNT's dominant strain. I remember suggesting that Omicron was our dominant strain, or was going well on the way to be our dominant strain, probably last week. And when I read the story about what made it seem like Omicron was already there, we were seeing from, I should have pulled up that story, we were seeing from some of the medical professionals, them suggesting that there's no solid evidence that there's really the community spread. That was like a week ago. And now, all of a sudden, it's the dominant strain. I think that was kind of expected a long time now. I really don't like when people are trying to handle you, where they're trying to regulate the information they release because they want to control the emotional response you have. I don't like that kind of controlling thing. leave that for people's parents. If your parent wants to do that and control what they tell you, well, that's your parents' business. That's not the job of officials in government positions. Give the people the information, don't hold it back. CMO Omicron, now TNT's dominant strain. The Omicron variant of concern is now officially in community transmission locally and is the dominant strain in circulation, according to the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasram. Now, here's the thing. If you look in most places where Omicron became the dominant strain, after Omicron touched down, within about a month or to 6 weeks time, you would see a serious spike in infections. There would be a slight increase in hospitalizations because the fact of the matter is, if just a seriously large volume of people are becoming infected, there would be some ending up in the hospital. But you'd still generally find the infections are milder. An African doctor, I believe it was one working in Uganda, or was it Ghana? Uganda, I believe, in one of the COVID treatment centers, he phrased Omicron as Omicron was the vaccine we wish we created. He phrased Omicron as if it were a vaccine. Because, Uganda. Because his view was that how mild these infections are, and they weren't seeing many children coming in, the way how mild these infections were, is it was basically just vaccinating the entire country by infecting them. That's not my statement. That's a statement according to a doctor over in Uganda that is the head of one of their COVID treatment centers. On top of Omicron now being our dominant variant though, first up, to answer a question I saw in some of the comments there, some people were finding it suspicious that with every new variant, the old variant disappears. That seems very suspicious. Like, what are they doing? How are the old variants disappearing when a new variant pops up? Well, that's actually pretty simple biology. If the new variant is more contagious, what would happen is it would multiply more and literally crowd out the previous variant, becoming now the dominant strain, as the previous variant has no one to spread to. This new variant has now crowded out the old one, especially if it gives retroactive immunity, as in once you got Omicron, generally what the science is saying now, if you get Omicron, the chances of getting any of the previous variants greatly decreases, or at least the chances of being hospitalized by it. Compounded on top of Omicron now being our dominant variant, though, is we are supposed to be finding, or we were supposed to be finding out news about what's going on in our healthcare system. There was an investigation launched. Several high-profile educators and medical experts were hired, and they were sent out to investigate exactly what was going on. And the Prime Minister made it clear, you know what, we want, this matter cannot stick. We really need this done quick. So 1 week, he said. When that announcement was made, I said in my MindFULL Live, I do not believe that. I believe a lot of these committees that are created to get pressure off. I made a contemplation on that one, committee country, where it seems like anytime things reach a boiling point, a committee is created, the Prime Minister comes out, oh, you are very angry over this. Wait, before you really get angry and want to do something rash, here's what. We'd create a committee to go and investigate this problem you have, and we'd get to the bottom of it. Now, he said this committee only has a week. I said from the moment that was said, I don't think the committee would only take a week. I don't think the assignment they were given was possible to finish in a week. And we are finding out that is true now. From January 26th, committee asks for more time to complete examination of COVID care. The committee established to examine various aspects of COVID care in TNT has been granted a 3-week extension to report its findings. When the announcement was made by the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, on January 15th, 2022, they were supposed to report back in a week. However, according to Health Minister Terence Dialsingh, the team led by Professor Terence Simangal asked for extra time. Minister Dialsingh's revelation also followed a call by opposition leader Kamla Prasad Bisesa on Monday night for an update on the status of the work being done by Professor Simangal and his team. So, surprise, surprise, the team hasn't finished yet. So here's the thing. Here's the big question in that. No. Someone is saying that people call KR a dictator, but I find he appoint too many committees for a dictator. People misuse words. Words have meanings. People were calling Mr. Manning a dictator. Mr. Manning's temperament wasn't dictatorial. It wasn't. That's just the fact. You don't have to like the man. But let's be honest, his temperament, his very demeanor wasn't dictatorial. Dr. Keith Rowley, you may not like some of his policies. You may not like the man. You may not like the shine on his head. Fine. Good for you. That's fine. But to say he's a dictator, that needs some kind of evidence. You need to say, a dictator means he wants to run the country as his own personal country. I say this and that's how it goes. That's what the dictator does. That's not really what Dr. Rowley is. You might call the PNM elitist. You might call them oligarchic. But I wouldn't say the leaders there are dictatorial. The very nature of the People's National Movement. They are a party. They recently celebrated how many? 66 years was it they recently celebrated? They are an old institution, at least old by Trinidad standards. It would be very difficult for a dictator to come out of the PNM ranks because they have such institutional power. No one person would be stronger than the party. That kind of statement would more be a PNM statement. If you are to worry about a dictator in Trinidad politics, worry about the UNC, because the nature of the UNC party structure is they have much more of a supreme leader structure. In the UNC right now, they have a political leader who has lost every election since the only one, well, was it one or two? Since the only two she won. Every election after that, the person just keeps losing and losing and losing and losing. I could tell you if that was happening in the People's National Movement, the party would have already elected someone differently. But the nature of how the UNC was founded and formed, they have really strong loyalty. They have really strong loyalty to their leadership. So if you were to worry about a dictator, you'd have to worry more about the UNC. But personally, I don't think that Trinidad by itself, the general culture of Trinidad, is conducive to dictatorship. It's hard to have a dictator over a multicultural nation. To have a dictator over a multicultural nation is very likely going to end up in a lot of conflict. Because the very nature, we spoke about this multiple times during the week, the very nature of a multicultural nation is you have to balance and juggle multiple views and multiple people who have different standards, people who have different interests, and you'd have to juggle that and juggle it well enough to keep a stable society. And if you are a dictator, the very nature of a dictator, why you would want to be a dictator is because you don't care to juggle multiple interests. The only interest you're juggling is your one interest. You're juggling my interest only, which makes for a very easy juggle. But in a country like that, can you imagine if there's one Hindu dictator, and Duke might be if there's one Hindu dictator in Trinidad and they try and push that over the entire Trinidad population, there's going to be revolt. If there's one Christian dictator in Trinidad and they try and push that over the population, there's going to be revolt. I mean, Trinidad was the country where a Hindu organization asked to change the name of our highest award from the Trinity Cross because they found it had too much of a religious lean. That's not a country leaning into dictatorship. On that note, just to highlight that story, I don't know how many of you may have remembered that the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha requested that we change our highest award from the Trinity Cross. And they changed it to the Order of Trinidad. The irony in that is, how many of you know what Trinidad means? Do you know what Trinidad means? The name of our island, Trinidad. Do you know the meaning? Exactly, Curvon. Exactly. So, the Trinity Cross leaned into one religion that worships a Trinitarian God. So they didn't like that idea. How could that possibly be our highest award? So let's remove that religious suggestion from our award. We don't want the Trinity Cross. We want the Order of the Trinity. Yeah, that made sense. I found that made no sense. Even back then when it was done, I read that and I was like, I don't get it. And I kind of have problems with people trying to change history too much. With people trying to change history too much. If I go to India, India has hundreds of years of, thousands of years of history. If someone wants to award me with the highest prize in India, I would not be surprised if there may be a Hindu religious lean to that prize. If my religion forbids me from accepting it, well, I'd let them know that and I'd tell them, well, write my name down or have an alternative prize. But I find to remove the Trinity Cross, remove some of our historical merit, if you will. That's my personal view. There's no science behind that. That's just my personal view. Okay, we've been running for a while over on YouTube and Instagram, but that's all I have for now. I'll be over on TikTok hosting the TikTok after live chat as we usually do. Those tend to get pretty interesting. But TikTok, let's not go too long. People need to sleep. So I bid you adieu over on YouTube and TikTok. J. Chris is now joining over on Instagram. What's going on, J. Chris? I don't understand. You're joining when I'm ending over on Instagram. But still, thanks for joining, man. Giving me that extra view. Make sure to hit that like button as I close. If you're over on TikTok, still be hitting that like button. If you are viewing this on YouTube, and for all the people who come after and look at the video, you can drop a comment still. Drop a comment, tell me what you think about the live, especially if you reach to the end. I'm interested to see who looks through 1 hour plus of me speaking about news. I'm interested to see. Drop a comment and tell me, hey, I reached the end. If you reach the end over on YouTube there. So yes, I'll see you again tomorrow at 9. Goodbye. Laters YouTube, laters Instagram.